Hi guys, Jo here and welcome to the Time for Tea Designs YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be showing you a tutorial using our Painter Bonnie digital stamp. She comes as part of a set with another character holding a large Copic pen, so perfect for crafty friends and your crafty cards. But I decided to use this particular image with the large paintbrush today, as I had an idea of creating a background that looked like big paintbrush strokes. So that's the video that the tutorial that we'll be going through today. So I've already printed my image out onto super smooth paper, and this paper is the perfect way to go through my inkjet printer. It's just a basic printer, nothing fancy, not too expensive, but I do find that the inks that this printer uses, they do work really well with the Copic markers. I don't get any bleeding. I know a few people have asked me that in the past when working with Digistamps and Copic markers, but I've never had any problems with the printer that I'm using. I will link to the printer in my description in the blog post as well, in case you are interested. But again, this is just a regular printer, nothing special. So I'm sure any other make of inkjet printer would work just as well. So I've just coloured up her skin there in my usual selection of colours for skin. That tends to be my go-to colour selection, and now I've moved on to the hair. With this hair, I'm just using flicking motions with my pens, starting with the lightest colour first on the very edges of the hair, where I think that there would be some shading, so around her hairline, around where the paintbrush is in front of her, and then behind her head where I think there would be most shadow. And I'm just bringing my lighter colours right into the centre, but leaving some white space so that it creates some highlights. And then finally I'm just going over with the lightest shade just to fill in any white spaces. So you'll see there that I did just fill in a base layer onto the bristles of my paintbrush, and I will come back to complete that later. But now I've moved on to the little girl's top, and I'm using BG10, BG13, B15 and B23, and you notice there that I've done a little bit of tip to tip colouring, as I felt that the shades were quite far apart and I just wanted to get a better blend there. And I did also feel at this point that I was getting some oversaturation, so I've left the top for the moment and moved on to my leggings. My leggings are just the T3, T5 and T7. It's quite a small area that I'm filling, so I'm not going overboard with my shading. Just covering the base of the legging with my lighter shade and then going in with the darker shades. So I'm now going back to my brush, and the silver portion of the brush is using C1, C3 and C5, and I'm applying my shade to the bottom of the brush handle there. So I'm going in now to complete the bristles on my brush using my Y21, Y15, Y26 and Y28, just applying the darkest of those colours right at the tip of the bristles and at the base, just to add some shadow and a bit of dimension. Now that my top has had chance to dry a little bit, I've gone back in with the darker of those B markers just to add a little bit more dimension, as I felt there wasn't enough there before, and like I said, I felt that I was in danger of oversaturating that part of her outfit and bleeding into the rest of the image. Now that's complete, I'm going to finish the handle of the brush with the R22, R24, R27 and R29, and in the same way that I've done with the silver portion of the the brush handle. I'm applying the darkest of my shades to the very bottom of the brush there to create the shade, and that's where I believe there would be shadow from, with my light is coming from above. Is to complete her shoes, and I'm using V01, V05 and V15 with just some very simple shading, covering the shoes with the lightest colour first and then working it through my darker shades where there would be some shadow. For the finishing touches for my image, I always like to go in with my Gelly Roll pen and just apply some highlights. So again, with the lightest areas of the clothing, the brush, the hair, I've just added a little line and a couple of dots with the white roll, and then applied some spots to her leggings just to create a little bit more of interest. So here she is, the final coloured image. I hope you enjoyed the colouring portion of the video. I have tried to keep that in and keep that not too quick, just so that I can talk you through the process, but it'd be great to hear what you think in the comments below. So now we'll go into the card itself and start putting my elements together. So I started with my background first, and for this I cut out a rectangle of 300 GSM cardstock, and I'm now using my Distress Oxides to splatter some colour onto that background piece. I'm using 3 different shades of Distress Oxide. I will list those colours in the description below and in the related blog post, but I've just applied the colour to an acrylic block and added a little bit of water to my brush before then rubbing that into the ink and then splattering that off the edge of the block directly onto my piece of paper. Normally I would use a box maybe to put my background into to prevent splatters going everywhere, but I didn't want to impede the video at all, so I have just done this directly onto my craft mat. However, I did end up with splatters of ink everywhere, so it did take a bit of a clean up to put that right. Now this portion of the video is just a mock-up of what I did because I didn't actually record this. I must have forgotten to press the record button, but I used the die that comes as part of the Swimming By to Say Hi mermaid set from the Create and Craft release that we did, and this particular die has a stamp with it that and this cuts out some waves, but it has a really sweet little edge here which I thought looked like brush strokes, so I thought it'd be really cool to use it in a slightly different way than it was originally intended, and this just I think just adds another dimension to your dies, means that you can stretch out the use of them to different things. And I've cut that out using different colours of paper here, but because I didn't have all of the colours that I needed, I did use one of my Copic markers just to colour in the back of one of those pieces of paper, so that I was getting the colours that matched my colour scheme. So now that those elements have been cut out, I moved on to stamping up my sentiment, and this stamp is one that I've had for such a long time, but the sentiment itself worked so well with this particular image, so I'm just using some Versamark ink, clear embossing ink, to stamp that sentiment onto some dark grey cardstock, and I'm then going to cover that with some white embossing powder. So I'm applying some really good layers of the embossing powder, a couple of sweeps of the powder onto the sentiment, just so that I make sure I'm getting really good coverage, and then I'm going to use my heat tool to set that embossing powder in place. It is a really good tip to try and heat up your gun before you apply the heat to your sentiment. This will help prevent any warping of your cardstock. So I'm just applying that heat now, moving the sentiment around so that I'm getting all of that embossing powder completely melted and set in place. So once my sentiment is completely dry, I then die cut the sentiment out using this shaped die that I had in my stash. I bought this a long time ago from a local craft store, but I will try and link to something similar. And I've just used my snap machine to cut that sentiment out. So just here I'm just trying to organise where I would like each of my elements to live onto the card base, and whether I wanted to stagger those waves or whether I wanted them all to line up. And in the end I decided that just lining them all up would look that little bit better. And then I've just reorganised each of the waves in colour order so that they are opposite to her outfit. So once I've decided on my layout, I'm now going to adhere each of those waves onto my splattered painted background piece, and I'm just using some liquid glue to do that and using my tweezers just to help me position those. And so that I get my spacing a little bit more accurate, I've started with my bottom piece and then the top piece and then filled the rest in the middle. So now that that's all completed and they've all lined up as I liked, I'm now going to apply that back panel onto my card base using some foam tape. And I'm applying that all over the back of the card and then just using those flaps to give me a little bit of time to make sure that's fully lined up. And now I can apply my image just using again some foam tape along the back to add some dimension. So I remove all of the backing tape from my foam pads and then just apply the little girl to the left hand side using my sentiment as a bit of a guide for placement, and again applying those foam pads to the back of the sentiment so that I can position that next to my image on the front of the card. The final stage of my card is one of my favourites, but can also be a frustrating one for me. I'm just applying some of these enamel drops to various points along my waves, just to add an extra little bit of interest and to carry on the idea of paint drops along the front of the card. But what I do find is that I sometimes have a little bit of an issue with getting air trapped or the fluid being dried into the nozzle of the bottle itself, and so this ends up with a splodge onto my project or me just not being able to use it at all. But this did seem to go really well. I had a few little issues, but I'm just using a series of smaller and larger dots in various places all over the front of the card. And I really liked the way that it turned out. However, you will see at the end with the resulting pictures that I did have a little bit of an accident with one of those dots. So here's the final card, and you can see on the bottom that I did smudge the one of the bottom red dots there. Somehow I managed to either put a finger in it or something else landed on it, and I did do a little rescue job, and I think it turned out okay. It's a handmade card. There will be smudges and there will be mishaps, but I don't think it takes away from the overall look. I really hope that you liked today's project. If you did, it would be great if you could like and subscribe to the channel, as it really does help the video get out there and seen by other people. There will be more projects coming up, and I would love to hear from you in the comments as to anything that you would particularly like to see. And in the meantime, happy crafting, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye now.